So I wanted to create a little bit of a think aloud about creating scaffolded notes, especially during the digital era that we are in. So scaffolded notes are typically when you would have um, sort of printed out an outline of the short lecture that you're going to give. Um, and you would strategically remove elements that you want students to fill in. And you could also differentiate this depending on, the different language proficiency levels of your students. You may have some students fill in more than others. Or you may, for example, choose strategically what words you might remove um, based on some of the background knowledge a student may or may not have based on prior education, that kind of thing. So you can have everybody get some sort of an outline that they're adding their notes to and filling in certain blanks of information they're listening for. But different people can get different ones, and it doesn't really matter, right? Because everybody's engaging in the same task overall. Now that we're in the hybrid, or rather remote learning digital environment, like usually in the past I would have just, created something pretty simple, printed it out, students do it by hand. Well, clearly, if you're doing work with students synchronously online, unless you have some sort of system where you can send home paper, you need some sort of a digital solution. So within Word, in case you don't know about it, there's a way you can essentially create forms, and you can tweak that a little bit to your purposes as an educator. So I'm in the Mac environment. I would imagine the Windows is pretty similar. You're going to notice that in my ribbon, I have a tab called Developer. If you don't have that, you want to go into the Preferences, and you want to find Ribbon and Toolbar. And then this is where you can customize what shows up in your ribbon. And Developer is the very last one usually, and so you just want to make sure that you check that the way that mine is. I don't need to save anything because mine's already there, but you would hit save. All right, so now what happens is I have some really cool options available to me. So for example, I can add a text box. So what is your name? And then below that, I could add a text box. I can create checkboxes. So I'm not feeling particularly creative this morning. The best type of ice cream is strawberry, chocolate, vanilla. And then you want to give people options for something like that too. So you could combine a checkbox and a text box. Whoops. Other. There you go. So you can do all sorts of things like that. You can add in frames, options, different combo boxes, but honestly, I find text boxes and checkboxes can do pretty much everything you need. When you're done, you hit Protect Form. And now the student cannot type just anywhere. They can only type in their boxes. Beth. I personally like chocolate. Or they could do this. Now notice that this is not like a fancy piece of software that'll prevent your students from clicking, all the boxes. All right. So don't think of this as a way to make a quiz as much of it's a way to make kind of a worksheet. All right. So that's the tech piece. Now I want to keep editing, so I'm going to unprotect the form. So then now thinking aloud about the pedagogy of it. So in class, I'm going to model this. And so here's my thought process. This is the information that I'm going to talk about with you all. Let's go ahead and get rid of all this. All right, so I'm going to start by just putting in my outline of my thinking. And obviously this information is for you all as adults. It would look quite different depending on the age group you're looking at, but the concept is the same. And so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to think through what are the pieces I really want you to have to listen for and to put down, maybe even in your own words, right? So I'm going to actually get rid of this as an example. Input is what is the language that's available to the learner. And that's something I'm going to really want you to listen to, how I say it, and put it in a way that makes sense to you. So I'm going to replace that with a text box. All right. Then I'm going to think through, wow, my notes don't really make sense here. Why is there an arrow? Okay, well, it's because as I'm going to be talking, it'll make more sense. But you know what? I want to make sure that you notice input leads to intake. So I'm going to replace intake as well so that you have to do that. Okay. I'm not going to make you listen to me go through this whole thing, but that's just the general idea. Sometimes you're going to do words, sometimes you're going to do clauses. And again, the piece you really want to think about as you're thinking about language specific differentiation is what are my purposes for having students write down notes? So if my, well, that and kind of what level are they at in their proficiency using English or whatever language that is that you're teaching in that moment. For example, then, one thing I might not do, especially if I had a more beginning level learner, I would probably not blank out both input and intake, right? It's really important that they get both of those right to understand the content. So part of that is I'm thinking about their conceptual understanding. I don't want to get the two confused. Or even more dangerous might be to get rid of this sign, right? Because it's a huge difference between equals and not equals. And my goal right now in their taking notes is not to assess if they get it, it's to introduce them to that idea and to make sure that they don't miss it, right? Maybe now thinking from a proficiency perspective, maybe I have a student that has just added, as an example, the word learner. I might strategically take out every single learner now, right? Because I really want them to be listening for that word, okay? The last thing I'll say is that the purpose of this that I'm showing you is to support, in a sense, it's a language support when your focus is on content, right? So the point of this is you are delivering information to your students and you're trying to scaffold that content learning through a linguistic support like this. Another technique that is similar but with a different purpose, you may have heard of something called a close activity. And in that sense, content is the vehicle, but your goal in that moment is to support usually a student's listening proficiency, to help them improve upon their listening. And so if you're doing a close activity, in those cases, instead of having like an outline like this, because you're going to be talking about notes, you might actually probably would have sort of a paragraph from, say, a story, fiction, or something nonfiction, but something that you're going to read aloud, and that as students listen, they're going to see word for word on the screen what you're saying, but you're going to blank out, say, every fifth word, as an example, or every 10th word, doesn't matter. And so the goal there is that they can follow along word for word, and they're listening for each of those words, and then they're really listening for that missing word and writing it in. So I hope that makes sense, that there's different goals. That you want it to be word for word what's on the page because the focus is on language acquisition, development. But that in this case, my focus is on the content and getting across new ideas, but I want to create a linguistic support. And so that's why this is an outline, not a word for word. Okay.